We're always on the lookout for actually innovative things going on in the world of drum building, and we have something wild to show you today that we have never seen before from the guys at Doc Sweeney. As it turns out, just because we've never seen it before doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't draw from history. In this case, history from 100 years ago, and also history from another instrument that has very little to do with drums, but we'll get to that. Before we get into exactly what's going on inside of this drum, let's hear a little more of it at a medium tuning. Beautiful sounds, throaty, fat, loud, wonderful. But where is that sound coming from exactly? There is a whole history of drums having reinforcement rings inside of them. There's a whole history of drums just having straight shells up and down. This is a third thing that, again, we never actually seen before and is super interesting. First off, let's describe the shell a little bit. This is a stave shell drum. It's made of maple, and it has something akin to a reinforcement ring, but in the case of this drum, it only has one on the batter side, and it is carved into the shell rather than added after the fact. They begin this shell at almost 2 inches thick and then route out the inside so that you end up with what constitutes a very large reinforcement ring on the batter side that's then vented with holes around the circumference. This drum is part of their Focus series, and this design is less about any kind of reinforcement and more about focused, articulate tone and getting a drier sound out of the instrument that has really clear articulation in the center of the head. Let's hear a little bit more of this drum. When I first got ready to play this drum and was just tapping on it a little bit, I really wasn't sure what to expect because, again, this is a very unique design. What I'm getting out of this drum today is that articulation in the center of the head, along with a very big note, both in the rim shot and just striking the center without catching the rim. Additionally, I really love all of the overtones that I'm hearing. Sometimes when you have a drum as wide open and resonant as this, you get overtones that are less pleasing, but everything about this feels beautiful and blends into the groove in a delightful way. Particularly when playing grooves that are full of buzz rolls or have a New Orleans kind of flavor where a little bit of messiness in the wires is actually really desirable, having those overtones gives us a lot of that sustain that allows those buzzes to run together and make that awesome marchy but also jazzy kind of sound. Let's go in the other direction. This drum is touted by Doc Sweeney as being very articulate and very clear, particularly in upper tunings, but we're dying to hear what it'll do significantly lower. At this tuning, it's even more of exactly what I was talking about at the mid-range tuning, which is to say plenty of overtones, big sound, still articulate in the middle, and nothing in those overtones that's bothering me at all. You could muffle if you want to control them a little bit, but in terms of a broad, warm, and sustainy sound that really takes up a lot of space, you can't do better than that. I also love this kind of sound when I'm playing shuffles in a mid or slower tempo because, again, taking up some space and giving a little more value to each of the notes and sustain and longevity lends itself to that kind of beat that has a lumbering, comfy, and relaxed sort of feel. This isn't to say that you also can't hit super clear backbeats with this kind of tuning and just enjoy that sound sustaining through the bar as well. Ghost notes, sure, but what about just big 2 and 4? Of course, the sound of this drum isn't entirely dependent on this carved-in ring inside of the drum. Everything about it is affecting the way that it behaves. This drum features 45-degree bearing edges with a very slight round over on the outside. It has medium width, maybe 4 inches wide or so, snare beds, and it also features 8 lugs, triple flange hoops, and a really cool strainer from Black Swamp. Doc Sweeney has also chosen to feature Evans heads on this drum, and it's actually utilizing a head that we've been experimenting with here recently ourselves, the Strata 1000. It's a 10mm head that behaves a little bit differently than something like a G1 and really lends itself to these overtones and really speaks for a long time. In addition to the sound behavior, the fact that the batter head is a little bit translucent also allows us to see visually what's going on with that design inside of the drum, the vents and all of that. Additionally, we have a pretty standard snare side 300 on the bottom and 20-strand steel wires. As we said earlier on, this stems from a very old design from the 20s and 30s that was actually something that the Slingerland Drum Company came up. But it wasn't just for drums. We'll get to that in a second, but let's hear this at a screaming high tuning before we finish out. That sounds fantastic. It is crisp, it is articulate, it is not feeling choky to me at this extremely high tension, and honestly, it's just inspiring. It feels really good to play. I'm happy with it. One of the things that it is still exhibiting even in this range is that I'm hearing overtones and I like them. I don't feel compelled to muffle them at all, and it's very even throughout the head. I'm being as accurate as I can with my strike zone, but every hit sounds good, feels good, and they're blending together lovely. As far as the science of it and how much of this we can attribute to this particular design on the inside of the shell, all I can say is it is doing what they say that it does, and you really can't argue with that. This kind of tuning, especially when it's as open as this, really makes me want to play articulate rolls as well as buzz rolls and really get into ghost notes and different things that get a lot of texture and dynamic out of the drum inside of the grooves, just as much as I might want to hit backbeats. I'm also really enjoying the cross stick sound at this higher tension. It may or may not be something that you're aware of, but the tension on the batter head does change the behavior of the cross stick a little bit. It does change the sound, and the whole drum is activated when you do play cross stick. Thanks for sticking around, finally, for what I think is a super interesting bit of history about this. There was a device devised by Slingerland, again, in the 20s and 30s, quite a long time ago, that they refer to as the tone flange. And it was a style of drum where it was constructed out of wood. It was in the Radio King kind of era, but it didn't have a normal top bearing edge. It actually had a metal device that looks reminiscent of the ring inside of this drum that was placed on top of the drum before you installed the batter head. It was meant to modify the sound of the drum, give you certain kinds of articulation, and a different character than a regular wood or metal drum would have at the time. It even featured the vent holes in that ring that you see in this drum as well, which is another thing that harkens back to that. The most fascinating part, however, is that that design was borrowed by Slingerland drums from Slingerland banjos. Because if you've never had a banjo in your hands, I'll tell you, it's basically a drum with strings across the front of it. And there are a few different kinds. In this case, we're talking about something called a resonator banjo. This style is closed in the back and has a metal design within that forces the tone to reflect out of the front of the instrument, making it louder, more articulate, and really, really well suited for bluegrass and faster playing styles. At that same time, there was a whole world of open back banjos that had a similar design that you could see from the rear, sometimes made of wood, sometimes made of metal, and they still do all of these things today in the world of banjo construction. It stands to reason that if you're going to stretch a drum head over a device like that, whether it's a banjo or a standard snare drum, it's going to affect the behavior of that instrument. And it's another opportunity to just see what it's capable of. And as they say, invent instruments that have really specific character and get you a really interesting sound. This is a great example of modern drum builders taking old and maybe antiquated designs and discovering ways to fit them into the new drum designs that exist in our time now, modifying them for the music that's happening today, and finding new in the old, where a lot of the industry is basically just making the same thing over and over again, and frankly, asking us to buy something again that we already have. Thanks so much to Steve at Doc Sweeney Drums for sharing this instrument with us today, allowing us to share it with you. And hopefully this is something that's exciting. You want to check them out. There's a link below. They have a lot to offer. This is not the only wildly innovative thing that they're into right now. We highly recommend checking them out. They're a fabulous company.